Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Mawlana Muhammadin wa alihi wa azwajihi wa zurriyyatihi ajma'in. We had covered the third point, but we'll just go through it once more. I think I feel like we don't have a very good grip on this section yet. So in this section, Allama Iqbal is trying, the third point to note is that the mystic state at the moment of intimate association with the unique other self. This unique other self, these are the attributes of this unique other self: transcending, encompassing, and momentarily suppressing the private personality of the subject of experience. So the experience of this intimate association which the mystic self has with this unique other self is overwhelming and overpowering. So okay, so you have this mystic self, and this is unique other self. And this is mystic experience, which is a subjective experience in the sense that, like any other experience, it's the experience of this subject. But obviously, subjective experience doesn't mean that it doesn't have any objectivity. But there is always the question of this subjectivity intruding into objectivity. So whenever a subject has an experience, or whenever we have a subjective experience, the question of objectivity of this experience is a genuine question. This question arises in our ordinary day-to-day experience, so it should arise more so in this unique, extraordinary experience, like the experience of this unique other self. Okay, so this is the stage set for this argument. This is the backdrop of this argument. Now the question of objectivity arises, and one answer to this question provided here is that objectivity of this experience is that this experience for this subject is overpowering. So the subject is reduced to extreme, if not absolute, passivity. But this extreme passivity is sort of an argument for the objectivity of this experience, because if this subject is absolutely passive, then what is coming is from other than this self. There's no active intervention from this subject. So that's the first sort of argument for the objectivity of this mystic experience. And this sort of overpowering and the corresponding passivity of the subject is also be found in our sense experience. But then again, even though the passivity in the sex experience is not that overpowering to the same magnitude as it is supposedly in the mystic experience. Okay. But Allama Iqbal goes on to say that this alone cannot be the decisive proof of the objectivity of this experience, because for a simple reason, I think, that even if we are totally passive, subject is totally passive, it's coming from the other, there's no guarantee this other is God, for example. It can be some other overpowering self, for example, Descartes' evil genius or demon, etc. So we need more further argument to overcome this possibility or this doubt. And that's the connection to the next lines which we are going to read. Okay, so this is what he's saying here. Considering the content of mystic experience highly objective, cannot be regarded as a mere retirement to the mist of pure subjectivity. I think because of the overwhelming, overpowering nature of this experience. So that's the first argument for the objectivity, but it is not a decisive argument for the reason which I just mentioned a moment ago. So that's why he is going to address that now. But you will ask me. So that's the objection against, sort of a possible objection against this first argument. But you will ask me how immediate experience of God as an independent other self is at all possible. The mere fact that the mystic state is passive, that's the first argument, does not finally prove, like decisively prove, the veritable or the objective nature of the otherness of self-experience, because this self can be the other than the other. And also, despite its overpowering nature, it can still be some sort of a self-reflection. I mean, at least there is a possibility. Now, this question arises here is his answer, possible answer to this objection. This question arises, possible answer to the objection. This question arises in the mind because we assume without criticism that our knowledge of external truth is the type of all knowledge. If this were so, we could never be sure of the reality of our own self. Because presumably our knowledge of our own self is also sort of sense experience, even though that sense experience is introspective. However, to reply to it, I suggest the analogy of our daily social experience. So here he start building up his second answer to this possible objection. Okay, so let's dwell on this a bit. It is saying that this objection or doubt regarding the objectivity of the mystic experience of the other self arises because we have the conception or experience we have is entirely based on sense experience. And that was, in a sense, important because with the analogy of sense experience, the overpowering nature of the experience was connected to objectivity. But the downside is that sense experience, there's always possibility of doubt regarding sense experience, even if sense experience is overpowering, for the reason we just mentioned and other well-known reasons. So now he's trying to say that we can't base so our conception of knowledge entirely on our knowledge of the external reality through sense experience. So this model of sense experience is fine, but we can't base the whole conception of knowledge on this model, because if we did do that, then even we can't be even sure about our own self, because our knowledge of our own self based on sense experience can be doubted as well. But we, in fact, are never, almost never, sure of our own self. But as Kant showed, that self-certainty cannot be based entirely on sense experience. It has to be based on something else, as Descartes showed, for example. So this tells us that we can't we need to move away from the model of sense perception to deepen our model of the knowledge of the other self, especially this unique self which we encounter in the mystic experience, or we believe we encounter in the mystic experience, at least sometime. And that model, now he move on to our experience of our own experience of not just our own self, but our self experience of other selves like us. And he would say, he would go on to say that our knowledge of other self can't be entirely based on sense experience. Sense experience might provide a starting point, like it has to be some other sources or other models of knowledge which we apply to other self, because otherwise we would never sure of or entirely sure of the existence of other self if our knowledge of other self was entirely based on sense experience or something similar to sense experience. So maybe to understand the objectivity of our experience of the absolute self in the mystic experience, would be clearer if we try to understand better how we know other selves like our own, other human selves, other human minds in our day-to-day life. So he will move on to that, the problem of knowing the other self or the other mind. Okay, so it's obvious that we know our own self. However, in reply to it, I suggest the analogy of our daily social experience. How do we know other minds in our social intercourse? It is obvious that we know our own self and nature by inner reflection and sense perception, respectively. Inner reflection on the introspection, and sense perception, that's how we know the nature, the objective reality around us. We possess no sense of the experience of other minds. So we have our own self, and this experience is unique in the sense that in this experience we are the subject as well as the object. So this knowledge we can call self-reflection or introspection. And then we have this knowledge of nature around us, which is the totality of objects around us, including human bodies, I guess. So that's through sense perception, pure and simple. But how do we know other minds if human beings have other minds like us? Obviously, one way to know is through inference. We assume that since other people look and behave like our own, they must have minds like our own. So that's a form of inference, and Allama Iqbal will mention that. But that can't be the only reason we believe in other minds, because so that inference can also be inference criterion can also be applied to the other absolute self, the self we encounter in the mystic experience. But in the mystic experience, although our sense of that other self is overpowering, that other self is not physical in that sense. not physical, unlike other human minds who are supposed to have bodies as well. So he'll come to this question of knowing other minds, and then he'll apply the same criterion or the same test to knowledge of the other self or the unique self or the absolute sense, which we supposed to have encountered in the mystical experience. Okay, so the only ground of my knowledge of a conscious being before me is the physical movements, so because they have bodies. Physical movements, communication, similar to my own, from which I infer, so that's the inference. For the presence of other conscious being, because these physical movements are, for example, different from the movements of animals or the movements of plants or the movements of other non-animate bodies. Or we may say, after Professor Royce, who is American idealist, pragmatist, philosopher of the end of the 19th century, that our fellows are known to me, known to be real because they respond to our signals. They respond to our communication in a way in which plants and other objects don't, and even animals don't. So the signals they talk about, the words and human language as well as other bodily signals, and thus constantly supply the necessary supplement to our own constantly supply the necessary supplement to our own fragmentary meanings. So we know one way to know other mind is through, because they respond to us in a way which is different from other responses we receive from nature or from our own self, etc. And sort of I guess they supplement our own personal experience of our own self in a way. So we know other self, other minds, from their signals. Physical movements, but these signals are beyond physical movement. I mean, more than physical movements. The signal, these signals can be linguistics, non-linguistic, but obviously language is one of the main way we communicate. So the communication responses we receive are the proof, in a sense, that other minds exist beyond the body or beyond the rudimentary brains or minds of animals, for example. And obviously he's sort of angling toward the fact that if we receive responses from this unique other self, then those responses would be proof that that unique self is not a figment of our imagination. So that will provide another sign for the objectivity of our mystic experience, beyond the signs or beyond the proof that we already have through the passivity of that experience. So response is an important important argument for the example. And then he will go on to mention the verses of the Quran where it has been emphasized that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responds to the call of his slaves in dua, for example. And Allah Iqbal later on would say the prayer in the sense of a dua, in a sense, is a way of knowledge, not just a worship. Knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the ultimate reality itself. So we know the other minds through responses, and the same criterion can be applied at a higher level to the knowledge of the other self or the unique self in our mystic experience. Okay. So that follows as our fellows are known to be real because, or we may say after Professor Royce, that our fellows are known to be real because they respond to our signal and thus constantly supply the necessary supplement to our own fragmentary meanings through inference and other things. And thus a response, no doubt, is the test of the presence of conscious self. A proof. As the Quran also takes the same view, that, and your Lord saith, call me and I will respond to your call. And when my servant asks you, that's from Surah Baqarah, concerning me, وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِي فَإِنِّي وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِي عَنِّي فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ أُجِيبُ دَعْوَةَ الدَّاعِ إِذَا دَعَانِ فَلْيَسْتَجِيبُوا لِي. And when my servants ask thee concerning me, then I am nigh unto them and answer the cry of him. So this response is a proof that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is real and exists. So he goes on to say, it is clear that when we apply the physical criterion or the non-physical and more adequate criterion of Royce, in either case of our knowledge of other minds remains something like inferential only. Even response is inferential because through response we are inferring the existence of the self like ourself, but we are not experiencing the other self in the same way as I experience my own self, even with this non-physical signal. So physical signals and non-physical signals provide us inferential knowledge, although an inferential knowledge which is closer to direct experience than other forms of roundabout inferences. So yet we feel that our experience of the mind is immediate. Despite this, yet we feel that is immediate. So it's not as if when I talk to you, I feel like I'm inferring your existence. My subjective experience of you is not inferential. It is immediate and never entertain any doubt as to the reality of our social experience. In a same way, then, even though our proof of the objectivity of other mind, a unique mind, is inferential, necessarily inferential. From that we can't infer that our experience of that is also inferential. Our experience of that self is also immediate. In the same way, my experience of you is immediate. I don't, however, mean at the present stage of our inquiry to build on the implications of our knowledge of other minds and idealistic arguments in the favor of the reality of a comprehensive self. But all that I mean to suggest is that immediacy of our experience in the message is not without a parallel. So that parallel is the other self. It has some sort of resemblance to our normal experience, and probably belongs to the same. So there's an argument, but a probabilistic argument. So he's not saying it is final proof of the existence of God, but it is a proof, even if a probable proof of the objectivity of our mystical experience, and by inference, an argument for the existence of that unique being. Okay, I think this is a bit more clear now, this point. Okay, until the next time, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.